Good evening and welcome to the Route 393 Democratic Town Committee Coalition conversation hosted by the Democratic Town Committees of Bedford, Burlington, Billerica, North Andover, North Reading, Reading, and Tewksbury. My name is Trom Wynn and I'm the state representative of the 18th Essex District representing Andover, Boxford, North Andover, and Tewksbury. I am the moderator for this evening and I'm joined by Sarah Jane Griffin, who will be our timekeeper. Before I welcome the candidates, I want to explain the rules that our three candidates have agreed to follow here this evening. First and foremost, all safety precautions have been taken into consideration and implemented in order to host this debate in person here at the North Andover Community Access and Media Studios. You will see soon notice that the candidates are all socially distanced and candidates have agreed to wear their masks when not speaking. I'll also be doing the same when I'm not speaking. As for the debate rules, this debate has been crafted to be a conversation among the candidates. Candidates will be given 2 minutes for opening statements and 3 minutes for closing statements. During the conversation portion of the debate, candidates will be allowed up to 3 minutes to answer a question on two broad topics: job and the economy, and education and housing. The questions that will be asked were solicited from members of the Democratic Town Committees in this coalition, and we hope to get through as many of them as possible. Candidates will be given warnings off screen by our timekeeper at 30 seconds, 10 seconds, and time with verbal reminders if candidates go over time. Candidates can be allotted up to 1 minute for the right to rebut a question if their name is mentioned in a fellow candidate's answer. Lastly, civility is the primary goal of this debate. We have asked all of our candidates to adhere to this principle and respect their fellow candidates as we have this conversation about policy and their vision for the next 2 years representing the 6th Congressional District in Congress. And now, so let's welcome our candidates. First, U.S. Representative Seth Moulton, Democrat from Salem, Angus McQuilken, Democrat from Topsfield, and Jamie Belsito, Democrat from, it says Topsfield here.
You are correct.
All right, and Angus, I think.
We're also Topsfield.
Also Topsfield, okay, I want to make sure. Candidates are arranged on the debate stage based on their names drawn out of a hat for the opening statement. So we will start with Congressman Moulton.
Great, well, welcome everybody, good evening. And thank you so much for joining this important discussion. Thank you to our moderator. It's an honor to have you here. Thank you to our host, to the Democratic Town Committees that put this all together. And of course, thank you very much to those of you who are watching. I also want to thank Angus and Jamie for throwing your hats in the ring this year. You know, we are a stronger party when we have democratic debates about the future of our country and about who we want to represent us in Congress. I ran for Congress 5 years ago on a platform of change. I defeated an 18-year incumbent who had passed just one bill in his 18 years, and I made a promise that election night that I would fight for a new generation of leadership in Washington, because Washington is not working. We need to fix the problems in Washington. We need to fix a broken Congress that sent me to fight in a war that I disagreed with, because not enough people in Washington had the courage to speak truth to power. Many of you experienced the disappointment of a failing government over the past several weeks and months with this pandemic. I was with you in the Merrimack Valley the day the pipeline of the explosion. I saw the carnage firsthand. I've taken your stories to Washington. We wrote the Lionel Rondon Pipeline Safety Act. We told the story of what happened in the Merrimack Valley to the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and we amended their Safer Pipelines Act to include our bill. We're still making progress. Just last week, the bill passed the Senate. I have also used this office to hold Columbia Gas accountable. We have forced the company's leaders to resign. When we had the safety scare last year, I called for the company to be kicked out of Massachusetts altogether. Today, they are gone. They're not doing business here. I'm also pushing the the Justice Department to make the $53 million settlement the company made paid back to us. There's a lot more work to do, but I'm excited to continue fighting for you, and I'm excited for this debate tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Up next, we have Mr. McQuilken. You have 2 minutes for your opening statement, please.
Well, thank you, Trom. I want to thank our debate hosts. I want to thank the other candidates as well. I want to thank all of our viewers for tuning in tonight to this important discussion. My name is Angus McQuilken. I do live in Topsfield, where I've lived for the past 7 years with my wife, Diane, and between us we have 4 kids. But my roots in this district go deeper. My father lived in Marblehead, and so I spent a lot of my childhood in this district every other weekend, spending time with my dad. And my connection to this region goes back a ways as well, through my work as one of the members of the leadership team with the Massachusetts Life Sciences Center, where we were charged with implementing the state's Life Sciences Initiative to make us #1 in the world in life sciences, and much of that work was right here in the Route 93, Route 3 corridor in towns like Bedford and Burlington and Billerica. I believe I'm the only candidate in this race who has a background in economic development. So I look forward to our conversation tonight about economic development and the very connected issues of education and housing. I, like all of you, wear a lot of hats in life. In addition to being a parent, I'm a teacher. I teach at LaSalle University in Newton. I teach undergraduates in their communications department. And in addition to my role as an economic development official, I've also, for the past 30 years, been a coalition builder. Building coalitions of progressives that desire change and working with those coalitions to pass legislation that's making a difference in people's lives, including the nation's most effective gun violence prevention laws. And I'm also a cancer survivor, 12 years out. And that's what led to my interest in building a career in the life sciences. So in addition to being the only candidate with economic development experience, I'm the only lifelong progressive Democrat in this race. And I decided to run because we're not making any headway in Washington on all of the issues that matter. I've established 6 clear top priorities for the district that you can learn more about on my website, angusforcongress.com. We've launched this campaign for change because we need a member of Congress who shows up, who listens, who builds coalitions, and gets results. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Mrs. Belsito, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the committees for having me here this evening, and thank you to Representative Wynn for being our moderator this evening. My name is Jamie Zalloway Belsito, and I'm a progressive leader, education activist, a mental health advocate, a policy expert, a women's rights champion, a mother, and a wife. I'm an everyday person, a kid who grew up in a working class home. I'm a graduate of the Reading Public School System and of Salem State College. I'm a mom worried about my 2 young daughters in their education. I'm a daughter concerned about the health of my parents during this pandemic. And I'm a person that knows what it's like to lose their job, have no health insurance, worry about keeping a roof over my head. These are issues that people are facing in the district right now. Now more than ever, this district needs a representative who knows how to make government work for the people back home. We are in the middle of a global pandemic. We are not going back to normal anytime soon. We need a congresswoman who's focused on this district, fighting for school funding, PPE for our frontline workers and nursing homes, federal money for our Main Street businesses, and bringing business and jobs back to this district as we face supply chain and manufacturing shortages that have been highlighted by this pandemic. I may not have all the answers, but I am ready to do the work. My vision for this district is simple. It is to represent all 38 communities that are the 6th District and listen to the voices of the people who have not been heard. These are the voices of the American worker, families, mothers, seniors, the LGBTQI community, disabled, public school students, immigrants. These are the voices that are right here in this district. I have a proven track record of achievements in Capitol Hill. I've successfully shepherded legislation through both the House and Senate. We need a strong voice in Congress willing to speak up for the rest of us, for all of us, a voice that has been missing, and I believe I can be that voice for the 6th District in Washington. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Before I go into the questions, I want to make sure it's okay for me to address you all by your first names.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Goodbye,
Great, thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right, we're going to start with the jobs question. So Burlington and Bedford State Representative, my colleague Ken Gordon, has worked with the Route 3 coalition to come up with an outside-the-box idea to fund transportation between Burlington, Bedford, and the Lowell area called the Middlesex 3 Transportation Management Association. This plan will bring much-needed workers to the Burlington regional area. How do you envision the federal government's role in supporting our local community's ability to work on projects such as this and solve other regional issues? We will start with you, Seth.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the question. I'm very proud of the work that we've been doing for several years now with the Middlesex 3 Coalition and with Representative Ken Gordon in particular. And there's so much that has to be done here because transportation right now is crippling our economy. It's crippling our state. We literally have the worst traffic in the country. And it's interesting that the Democratic town committees are called they're named after highways here, the 93 Route 3 Democratic Town Committees. We have the Middlesex 3 Coalition, because really roads are the only option, the only really good option for getting around this district right now. That's something that we need to change. And it's something that I've emphasized since I first started running for Congress. We need to build a regional rail system for Massachusetts that gives people options. It allows people to continue to drive if they want to, but the highways won't be as congested because people will have a legitimately better option of taking the train with faster service into the city, but also faster service all around the Commonwealth, so that you have significantly increased access to jobs and significantly increased housing options because you can actually get from here to there. No one up here really works on the South Shore, so those jobs are basically off the table for all the folks who live in this part of the district. And that's wrong. I want to improve that access. And we can't do it by just building more roads. What we need to do is actually free up traffic on our roads by building a 21st century regional rail system. And that's something that I've been working on for a long time. In fact, regional rail wasn't even part of the conversation in Massachusetts when we started. So there's a lot of work to do here, and I look forward to continuing my partnership with Representative Gordon and the Middlesex 3 Coalition, but there's a long road ahead. We have the worst traffic in Massachusetts here in the entire country, and we can do better.
Thank you. We'll go to Angus next.
Oh, thank you, Tron. I first met Representative Gordon when we did a ribbon cutting together at a life sciences company in Bedford that was growing. He's been a real strong leader for economic growth in this region, so I applaud the work that he's doing on regional transportation. Transportation is one of my 6 top priorities for the 6th District because it's one of the biggest challenges we face in this region. And in this part of the district, it's a dual challenge, right? We have people who need to worry about, as I do, because I'm a daily commuter into Boston, right, how they're going to get into the city. And then we have the local traffic challenges of just getting around the area because so many people come to this area for their jobs from all over the region. When I was with the Massachusetts Life Sciences Center for 9 years, our offices were in Waltham. So I had to commute from Topsfield to Waltham every day. So I know your pain in this region. We need to provide multimodal transit alternatives for people so we can give people a realistic, safe, and reliable option to get them out of their cars and have another realistic way to get to work. Whether that be getting into Boston, where we've allowed our system to grow into enormous disrepair, or we need to identify public transit alternatives and things like bicycling infrastructure in our region that allow people to get to work in a way other than getting in a car.
And Jamie?
Thank you for the question. If I heard you correctly, Representative, you had asked how would there be a partnership between getting what I consider to be the means to help support the communities back here. I would be committed to making sure that there's open conversation between the state reps and the town administrators to hear what the needs are of the communities. We keep talking about light rail. It's something that's been needed for a long time. I grew up in Reading and probably spent an inordinate amount of time at the Burlington Mall at different points in my life. And the traffic was bad then. And now we've seen that Route 3 has blossomed. There's so many businesses that have moved out into the Billerica area, Burlington area. I'd be fighting and advocating for funding. I'd be looking to work with the state legislature. We just saw that a light rail study was put in place at the State House for us to take a look at that out in the PBD Salem area. That's something that we need to be facilitating up and down Route 3 and 495 area. So that's what I would be doing. I'd be advocating for and getting our voice at the table in the federal government for funding.
We have a rebuttal from Angus. Yep.
Just a further comment as we have this conversation. What I've proposed is a $1 trillion federal investment in public transportation in this country. A major investment in infrastructure so we can create a lot of jobs while at the same time addressing some of these longstanding concerns about transportation, including in the various regions of Massachusetts, not just for getting into the city of Boston. And I think at the same time, we can address one of the main factors behind the climate crisis, which is transportation. So to me, it's an investment that will have multiple benefits for society, and an investment we really need to make, because we've neglected the need for transportation infrastructure investment in this state for far too long. We have the second highest rate of train derailments of any state in the country, and we have just generationally underinvested in transportation as a priority. I work closely with MassBio, which is the Industry Trade Association for Life Sciences. They've identified 2 challenges to continued growth in Massachusetts of that industry, our state's fastest growing industry. And those 2 challenges are transportation and housing, both of which I'm glad we're going to have a chance to talk about tonight.
Do I get to try?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you for that additional comment, Angus. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, first of all, when we talk about regional rail, what we're talking about is 21st century transit, where you can get on a fast, clean electric train with frequent service, not just into the city, but all around the Commonwealth, and eventually connecting with high-speed rail right in the center of the city. It's made possible by the North-South Rail Link, which is a critical project originally delayed due to World War I, if you can believe it. It's something we've known we have to do for a long time in Massachusetts, but we haven't devoted the time and energy to doing it. But one point of clarification, since this is a conversation, regional rail is not light rail, it's actually heavy rail, because light rail are the slower moving vehicles like you see on the Green Line. That's not going to get people out of their cars. We need fast, modern, regional rail trains, which is actually taking our heavy rail commuter system and modernizing it with modern electric multiple unit vehicles. Thanks.
Sure, I'll throw a comment in here. There was a plan for a train system from this area of the district all the way up to the North Shore, and I think that it was dated 40 years ago, and then it was revisited again 20 years ago. People want to just get to their homes. They want to be able to go to work. I don't know anyone who's looking to have a full-bred implementation of a rail system right now when the traffic is as bad as it is. We need to be focusing on our falling apart infrastructure here. That's something that continues to go by the wayside in our federal Congress. We've been hearing about an infrastructure package for, 2 years now, and we still haven't seen money coming in on that. We need to be focusing on what people need right now, and it's going to go back to listening to what State Rep Gordon said, even if it is putting together some different modalities of mobility in the district as we figure out what the district actually needs. That's where we need to be focusing on.
Thank you all. We're going to move on to a second question about jobs and the, someone mentioned earlier the great appreciation for our frontline workers, and absolutely, before and even during this, and certainly during the COVID crisis and even after. So healthcare jobs in the more than half dozen hospitals in our region, many senior care facilities, as well as home healthcare workers have become key job makers in this part of the district. How can the federal government continue to support caregivers and in-home programs designed to help older adults and people with disabilities to remain in our communities, of course, with decent wages and benefits? We will start with Angus.
Sure. Thank you for the question. Healthcare is a critical industry in Massachusetts, a huge employer in Massachusetts, and it's closely tied in to the work we do in life sciences, right? We're a global leader in both the provision of high-quality healthcare and in the innovation side of healthcare and how we create new treatments, new therapies, new cures that can benefit people's health and save lives. And I think it needs to be a continued focus for our economic development strategy in Massachusetts. Let's face it, our hospitals are struggling. There was some aid provided in the federal relief package so far, but our hospitals are going to see enormous deficits in this current fiscal year because they had to postpone elective surgeries, they had to postpone all sorts of procedures in order to deal with COVID patients, and many of them, in fact, many have already had to lay people off, and many of them are looking at whether they're going to have to do layoffs, and that's not fair to our frontline healthcare workers. They have been the heroes of this crisis. They have shown up every day for work, putting their own lives at risk, putting their family's safety at risk to care for patients, and how are we going to thank them? We're going to thank them with layoffs. We need substantial increased federal support for our healthcare institutions. And that includes healthcare in a home setting. And this is something I have a lot of experience with through overseeing care for my father. I'm part of the sandwich generation, okay? So I have young kids, I have aging parents. My sisters and I have been responsible for overseeing my father's care. First in the nursing home and rehab hospital system, where the quality of care, by the way, is atrocious, and we need significantly increased federal oversight of the quality of care. It is unacceptable that over 60% of COVID deaths in this state were in nursing homes and senior living facilities. There should be a day of reckoning around that. There should be congressional hearings about that. But we also need to make sure that people who want to stay in their home have the support that they need to do that. And we've been able to do that and cobble together solutions for my father, who now lives at home with full-time care. But that care is expensive. It's out of reach for many families. The people that provide that care are paid almost nothing for the work they do, so we're not saying thank you to them with adequate wages and benefits.
Jamie?
Trom, if I may, pardon me, Representative Nguyen, if I may ask you to repeat the question so that I can hear that local part again.
With great appreciation to our frontline workers before and during COVID-19 healthcare jobs in more than half a dozen hospitals in our region, many senior care facilities and home healthcare workers have become key job makers in this part of the district. How can the federal government continue to support caregivers and in-home programs designed to help older adults and people with disabilities remain in their communities with a decent wage and benefits?
It's a lot to unpack there. There's housing in there, there's funding, there's paid leave. There's different federal programs that still haven't been implemented. The paid leave and paid sick days is a huge part of this conversation. We also need to be taking a look at wages. Some of these folks may be getting paid under the table. Maybe they are in a particular immigration status that doesn't allow them to be put on the books, and that creates a whole other underground situation for individuals that doesn't allow them to actually make a living wage. The biggest thing I keep hearing, though, whether it's Masconomet rehab down the street from me that had an incredibly high number of cases, that we are not getting PPE out to the workforce. We've not gotten it to the nursing homes. We've not gotten it to our seniors. We've not gotten it to the healthcare workers. And now we're going to be looking at a potential uptick in these cases in the state of Massachusetts as we continue to see, especially in this district. And it's PPE, and that's what the federal government needs to be delivering. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie. And Seth?
Thank you. I recently went to visit the doctors and nurses and other workers at North Shore Medical Center, the true heroes in the front lines of this pandemic. And they did a remarkably good job, one of the hardest hit hospitals in the state. And yet, they're all very concerned now about a second wave. They don't feel like they have the adequate resources yet. We've delivered some help from the federal government, but it's absolutely not enough, which is why myself and other Democrats in Washington are fighting for more. I'm proud of the PPE that we did deliver with the rest of the delegation, but we absolutely can do more. I've been fighting for hazard pay because these people are putting their lives on the line for us. They should get paid extra for that. We also have a massive nursing home problem in Massachusetts. The majority of deaths from there shouldn't have happened. And we've got to take advantage of this crisis on the backside to modernize how people get care. My very first bill in Congress was the Faster Care for Veterans Act that modernized care for veterans. We should do that for everyone else as well.
Angus?
Yeah, I'd just like to expand on, and I agree with you both about the heroism of the people who have been doing this work. We have a neighbor who lives across the street, had to live in an RV. He's a doctor. Had to live in an RV for 3 months. Couldn't see his kids. I remember speaking with a nurse at Beverly Hospital right as the PPE crisis began, and she had just been told that she was going to have to start reusing her masks, and she had small kids at home. I was recently on the train platform in Lynn, handing out masks to people who were heading into work, many for healthcare jobs, most for healthcare jobs. They all had badges for MGH and the Brigham. And what I also encountered were people coming out from work at 7 in the morning. Night shift workers. I think it's important that all of us remember that when many of us are at home asleep, these healthcare workers are on the job. and doing a critical job under very, very difficult circumstances. So I want to agree. I think there's so much more we can and should do to recognize the heroism of our healthcare workers.
I'll just continue to add, as I've been saying this entire time that we've been able to have interaction visually with the public, we are still at an inadequate level of PPE, and we are still faced with a deficit of COVID testing. These are all things that the government said that they were going to provide us, and the only money that we've seen is from a federal stimulus bill that was passed in the spring, and we're going towards the fall. We need answers, and we deserve them. And the frontline workers that are looking at this next surge are very worried about what that is going to look for them, because they don't have the access to the N95 masks. We don't have the respirators that were supposed to be made and delivered. We don't have the PPE to take care of our kids or our seniors or any of it. And the focus needs to be on how are we going to keep people protected. If I myself get sick and I end up in the hospital, they are on the front lines, and I want to make sure that they're protected. Thank you.
I just want to say, Angus, Jamie both brought up really important points, and I want to just hit on what Jamie was talking about, because it is unbelievably frustrating, and I know a lot of people are feeling this way at home tonight, that we have not been able to deliver another aid package. Now, there's a lot of blame going around in Washington. That's the name of the game these days, sadly. But the reality is that the Democratic House passed the HEROES Act with all the provisions that we're talking about tonight 3 months ago. 3 months ago, Democrats took action. We passed the HEROES Act, and Mitch McConnell in the Senate refuses to bring it up. So it's just important for everybody, I think, at home tonight to understand that while Republicans will try to blame Democrats for the inaction, we took action. We're at the negotiating table. It's the Republicans that refuse to show up.
All right, thank you for that. And related to jobs, we're going to switch gears and talk about the economy a little bit. And so in terms of where we are in the economy, how can our country stay competitive in the biotech industry that has its roots here, right here in the Route 393 corridor, as it faces competition worldwide? And how can the federal government help keep these jobs and companies here, especially as we're facing a recession? I think it's important for us to talk about not only bringing jobs here, but how to get people to spend their money here in our communities as well. And so I'm going to start with Jamie for this question.
Okay. I will take off the mask. You know, we have a very unique opportunity to reshore back here. We are in the 128 tech belt that's been this way since I was a kid and is home to, you name it. We have new companies popping up all over the place, and companies that are focusing on, right now especially, focusing on getting us a vaccine. This has to be a concerted effort for monies to be put into research and development. There has to be a concerted effort for the government to understand that we also need to be taking a look at immigration when we're talking about this as well, because we have some of the highest skilled workers in the world who are coming here, and this administration has done everything possible to make sure that they aren't able to get entry or come here or worry about their status. That has to be part of the conversation as well. We have the best universities in this district. We need to be keeping talent. We need to make sure that we are focusing all of our energies to maintain the development of there's more development going on in the biotech space that we probably don't even know about. And that's also the same with the reshoring. We have to be able to do some manufacturing here. We have to be able to reshore. And I want to point out something that I thought was a success. It's right outside, I think it's the 5th district, was the fact that Eastman Kodak just received some federal money there, and that was to create a domestic pipeline for medication and drugs. Those are the sorts of things we need to start looking at, because that's also going to affect how we price our prescription drugs and how people have access to things that need to be made back here in this country. We've seen the impact of what this pandemic has done, and it has not fared well for us.
Thank you. Seth?
Absolutely. Massachusetts is rightly proud of our leadership in biotech, but that leadership is not guaranteed. China is nipping at our heels. There's competition literally all over the globe, but Beijing has made it their commitment to be the next biotech capital of the world. So how are we going to protect against that? Well, I think there's three things we need to do. One, we need to continue federal investment in biotech. Federal investment in basic scientific research is what gave rise to companies like Moderna that are literally at the forefront of vaccine development for COVID-19. We need to continue that. Number two, we need to protect ourselves. China has been trying to steal vaccine data from our biotech companies just over the last few weeks. And third, we need to invest in our workforce. I'm so proud of the $1 million grant that we just delivered yesterday to Merrimack University, because that's going to help grow the next generation of biotech workers to support especially low-income students in STEM.
And Angus, thank you.
I appreciate the question. I was the fourth employee hired to be part of the leadership team for the Massachusetts Life Sciences Center, the agency charged with implementing Governor Patrick's $1 billion life sciences initiative. So I was one of the architects of the strategy that made us #1 in the world in life sciences. I'm very proud of that work because it created tens of thousands of jobs across our state, including thousands of jobs right here in this district, and supported the growth of companies that people in this area rely on for employment. Companies like EMD Serono, companies like Merck Serono, companies like Pfizer up in Andover. We created a model for how to take strengths and build on them to make a region a world leader in an industry. And people from all over the world have been coming here to ask the question, how did you do that? Well, we did it by taking assets that we had, our workforce, our investment community, our academic institutions, strengthening them through investment, and then pairing that with federal resources. Because it's the fact that we're #1 in the country in funding from NIH and the National Cancer Institute that fuels the fire that allows our life sciences economy to grow.
I just want to pop in here for a sec. And thank you, Congressman. It was Moderna. I couldn't think of it for the life of me. It was like right there. But again, look at what we're doing. Look at what we're doing right here. And there's a major opportunity for us to reshore and focus on the jobs here. I want to mention something too. The Department of Labor, for years, will in the Bureau of Labor Statistics, et cetera, they will always cite what are these shortage job industries. And in this particular region, where we are talking about high tech and we are talking about biotech, there's a unique opportunity for these companies to partner with Middlesex Community College, like we just saw. There's a partnership for biotech and being able to bring students in and start to train them for these jobs. And we're doing the same thing at Salem State. We need to be taking a look at what do we need from our next generation coming up into the workforce, and what is it that we can do to create partnerships with the employers that are here so that we're able to train the workforce that is ready and willing to be part of the economy here. Thank you.
So in terms of what we're talking about, international competition, but we also need to talk about our allies and economic partners who are effectively cutting us out of their trade policies, and we're also cut out from international decision-making due to the current administration and their ability to antagonize our allies at this point. So how do we work to restore these partnerships, very important partnerships, and trade deals? And what trade deals would you prioritize to benefit Route 393 portion of the district? We'll start with Seth.
Sure. I mean, this is such an important issue because Donald Trump has literally left this world in disarray. He's cozied up to our enemies, and he's alienated our allies. And he's done that from a national security perspective. He's done it from an economic security perspective. He started trade wars that are hurting our fishermen right here at home, hurting farmers across the country, and American families are paying the price. Now, I'm very confident that our next president, President Joe Biden, is going to reverse course here. And I was recently talking with his foreign policy team, because there is so much that we need to do to not only turn around the policies of Donald Trump, but set a new standard, to form a new generation of alliances, of arms control, and arms to meet the challenges of this new century. I was asked by our Democratic leadership in the House to co-chair the Future of Defense Task Force, We are looking squarely at the challenges ahead of us. And one of the conclusions, although we haven't released our report yet, but one of the conclusions we're coming to is that, as the best military leaders will tell you, if you want to have strong national security, it starts with diplomacy. We have to have a stronger State Department. We have to lead the way on trade deals, not cede them to China and others. We need to reaffirm our relationships with our allies. When I was a Marine in the 1st Marine Division, our division motto was, no better friend, no worse enemy than a United States Marine. That should be the motto for the United States of America. Our allies should know that they can trust us, and our enemies should know that they can trust our resolve. I will continue my work on the Armed Services Committee to deliver on that promise, of my mentor and friend Joe Biden when he's the next president, but also to make sure that some of those resources come right home to the district. We've delivered millions of dollars, actually hundreds of millions of dollars, to MIT Lincoln Labs, to Raytheon, to Hanscom Air Force Base, to the Costas Institute, right here in the Merrimack Valley, because they are helping to keep us safe and secure. They're keeping us all, they're strengthening our relationships with our allies, and they're doing it all to benefit the families here in the Merrimack Valley.
Thank you. Angus?
Well, this president has done enormous damage to our relationships in the world, and we have a lot of damage to undo. And I'm confident that we will replace that president, that dangerous and ridiculous president, with a team of people we can rely on to provide real leadership going forward. And this is one of the areas we're going to have to pay close attention to, is our relationships in the world, where we've lost a lot of respect, frankly, because of the failed leadership of Donald Trump and Mike Pence. When it comes to trade deals, I think there's going to be urgent work to do there with our neighbors in North America, with Europe, with the UK separately from Europe, as they have decided to leave the European Union. And as we look at those trade deals, I think what's important is that we make sure there are fair standards for labor, and that there are environmental standards that are going to protect our global climate, and standards that are going to protect the American worker. I'm a strong supporter of organized labor. I've always made sure that they're at the table with every coalition building effort I've ever been involved in. If we're going to negotiate trade deals, organized labor needs to be at the table, the environmental community needs to be at the table, all the key stakeholders need to be at the table so we can get this right and make sure that we have trade agreements that are benefiting the United States economy and that meet those important standards.
Thank you. Jamie?
So thank you for the question, because again, the House is on fire when it comes to this particular administration. There's no one here is going to disagree with that, right? We have to be looking at diplomacy. We've got to be looking at conversation. We cannot let one individual erode the character of our country. That's not who we are. And we have the right, maybe they're not in the administration, but we have the ability to rebuild our diplomacy. And that's something that we need to be looking at. We need to be moving away from focusing on military, and we need to be looking at focusing on diplomacy. When it comes to trade, I'm going to go back to the reshoring opportunity that we have right now. And this is our time to rebuild an environmentally sound economy. We have outsourced so much of our businesses and supply chain, and we've allowed money to take over because there are not as strict regulations environmentally in other countries. And these are the things that we have the opportunity to change here and bring business back here.
Before we move on to the next, I just want to go down the same order again and just talk. The second part of the question is, what trade deals would you prioritize to benefit specifically this district? So we'll go Seth, Angus, and Jamie.
Absolutely. Well, actually, I want to pick up on comments that both of you made are excellent about the importance of having environmentally sound trade deals and how much of a difference this makes when it comes to actually competing fairly in the international market. A great example is with our fishermen right here at home in Massachusetts. China is a big market, but when they're competing against fishermen in that part of the world who don't have any environmental regulations whatsoever, it's not a fair competition. One of my bills that's working its way through the House and the Senate is the Save the Right Whales Act, which will preserve this iconic species from extinction right off our coast. But right now, we have to fight with Canada because they don't have the same standards in Canada. And that's unfair to our fishermen, to our lobstermen right here at home. So there are a lot of trade deals that have very big local impacts, and fishing is just one example, and that's what we need to continue fighting for in Congress.
Thank
Well,
you.
I think I answered the question the first time around. I think we need a North American trade agreement. I think we need a trade agreement with Europe and the European Union. I think we need a trade agreement with the UK as priorities. So I'll address something that Jamie raised, which is, I'm a believer in diplomacy, and in multilateral agreements is how we work with other countries in the world. And that's a fundamental difference between the Congressman and I. He's a militarist. He had an opportunity just a couple of weeks ago to vote for an amendment put forward by Democrats to reduce military spending by 10% and have those funds go towards domestic needs like healthcare and education, the things we're talking about tonight. I would have voted for that amendment. Seth Moulton was the only Democrat in the Massachusetts delegation. He broke with the entire rest of our delegation and voted against that amendment to spend, so that we're now going to spend record amounts on defense spending at a time where we have urgent domestic needs, and it sends a message to the rest of the world about who we are. I think we should be sending a message to the rest of the world that we're interested in diplomacy and collaboration and not militarization.
Respond to that?
Yes, you can respond to that, and then we'll go to Jamie for her response. 1 minute.
There is nobody who understands the priority of peace better than those of us who have had to put our lives on the line to defend it. Yes, I was the only member of the Massachusetts delegation to vote for that amendment because I'm the only member of the Massachusetts delegation who's put his life on the line for this country and who understands the impact of across-the-board cuts to our defense budget. I think MIT Lincoln Labs, the Costas Institute right here in the Merrimack Valley, deserve the money in that defense bill. I don't think 10% of it should be arbitrarily taken away. I actually believe we can cut our defense bill by more than 10%, but we've got to be smart about how we do it. We don't take away critical money for our frontline troops because it literally keeps them alive. I've seen the consequences of doing that in the front lines. We don't take away critical research dollars from institutes like the MIT Lincoln Labs because they're charting our future. So I do have a very different opinion on this, a different view, and it comes from my experience.
We're going to go to Jamie, and I want to remind everyone that if your name is mentioned in an answer, you get the right to 1 minute rebuttal, just as what happened earlier, just so I don't want you to think that I skipped over you, Jamie.
No worries at all. Thank you. I will speak to this subject as best as possible. I'm not coming to this race as a trades specialist by any stretch of the imagination, but I do understand that we have partners that we need to be working with. When we take a look at that North American Free Trade Association agreement, rather, the 2.0 that was just launched, which was with much reluctance and a lot of foot dragging and a lot of discussion amongst the unions. We need to be looking at our next door neighbors and who we are working with. That right there is a community approach, and that is Mexico and Canada. And we do need to make sure that that relationship is strong because those are our allies and those are our neighbors. And those are folks that we're partnering with that do have a cross-border economy here that would be affecting the production and how we are managing and inputting with our economy here in the Route 3, 95-93 area.
Thank you. Angus?
I just want to expand on this difference because it's a fundamental difference. Seth Moulton has been a card-carrying member of the War Caucus in the House of Representatives. Just prior to the vote where he did not support the amendment to reduce defense spending by 10%, record levels of defense spending by 10% to go toward domestic needs. He voted in committee with Lynn Cheney, daughter of Dick Cheney, one of the most hawkish members of the Republican caucus, to indefinitely extend the war in Afghanistan, a war we've been fighting for 19 years, the longest armed conflict in our nation's history. This is the difference between us. I think we need to responsibly end that war and not continue that war for the benefit of those who make their money by building and selling armaments that are used in Afghanistan.
You know, I knew that there'd be a lot of political mud thrown at me in this race. It's not the worst thing that's been shot at me in my life, so that's okay. But there's a certain level at which it's just incredibly insulting. I can guarantee you there's no one who wants to bring the troops home more than me, because I understand what it means to be out there every single night with your life on the line because people in Washington can't make good decisions. That's why I got into the race in the first place, to be a member of Congress. I didn't grow up studying political science, interested in politics. I got into this because I saw the consequences of failed leadership in Washington. The worst mistake we could make in Afghanistan is bringing home the troops without a plan so that we have to send them back, which is exactly what we did in Iraq, to go back to refight battles that we had already won at the cost of more American lives. Not on my watch. There were a lot of Democrats who voted with that amendment. And if you look, they were veterans. They're people who get this, who understand what it means to stand up for our troops.
So we're going to go to the last question before we break for the halftime. In light of the growing federal deficit, what will you do to ensure that the Social Security and Medicare programs that workers have paid into over many years are not cut, but are instead made more solvent? We're going to start with Angus, then Jamie, and then Seth.
So listen to what you hear from this president. Right? We're going to cut payroll taxes, and then if I'm reelected, we're going to make those cuts permanent, and you're not going to have to pay. Well, what do those payroll taxes pay for? They pay for Social Security and Medicare. That's what he's talking about cutting, right? And his goal is what the Republicans' goal has been for a long time: constrain the resources for those programs so that they can get cuts. That's what they've always wanted. They want to cut those programs for our seniors. I'm fundamentally against that. I think we need to expand access to Medicare by lowering the age of eligibility to 60. And when it comes to Social Security, you know, there were a lot of good ideas that were generated as part of the presidential campaign by a lot of candidates, not all of whom made it to the finish line. But Elizabeth Warren put out what I thought was a really good plan on Social Security. It would have immediately increased benefits by $2,400 a year for all recipients, long overdue, to make sure people can keep up with the cost of living. It would have created a caregiver credit, because women, as we know, are disadvantaged by the Social Security system because they don't get credit for the years that they were, in many cases, home caring for kids, caring for elders, caring for other relatives. We need to make sure that women are not disadvantaged in our Social Security system. So that's something we need to address. And how do we pay for all this? Well, her plan, and I think it's a sensible plan, would have been to pay for it by increasing Social Security taxes on the top 2% of wage earners who currently don't pay any more than your average middle-class taxpayer, because it's the amount of wages that you pay Social Security taxes on is capped. So, you know, I think we need to address the needs of seniors by strengthening Medicare, by strengthening Social Security, and not allow this administration to achieve their goal of constraining the resources that are much needed for these programs and then trying to cut the benefits that we know are so very much needed by seniors in our society. And while we're on this topic of what we need to be doing for seniors, I just want to circle back to this issue of quality of care for our seniors in our nursing homes and senior care facilities. What I witnessed as an overseer of care for my father was absolutely atrocious. You know, he was in a facility, a Medicaid facility, where you just have to take whatever bed you can get. And he was in a facility where he didn't see a doctor for months. We had to remove him from that facility in the middle of the night, take him to the emergency room. I went back across the street and had to knock on the door for a half hour to see if I could even get in. And when I got to that nurse's desk on his floor, you know what I heard? You know what they told me? I needed to get his list of prescription medicines. What they said to me, and it was shocking. Not a single person who's here tonight works for this nursing home. We're all contract staffers provided by a staffing agency. We don't know how the system works. We can't provide you with the information that you need. So as we deal with Social Security and Medicare, we desperately need to deal with the quality of care that we're providing to our seniors. It's entirely unacceptable. We need stronger federal oversight.
Jamie.
Okay,
Thank you.
great, thank you. We were talking about, can you repeat the question again? Because I got sidetracked by talking about seniors, and that was not the question, correct?
In light of the growing federal deficit, what will you do to ensure that the Social Security and Medicare programs that workers have paid into over many years are not cut, but are instead made more solvent?
Sure, this is something that we spend our lives working, at least I have, putting into a Social Security system, expecting that figure that you get on that piece of paper every year, or when you type in your Social Security number, it says, here's what you're going to be able to have monthly. And these are figures that I personally am concerned I'm never going to see. I have been of the Generation X where pensions were taken away. A crapshoot called a 401k program was implemented. We saw what happened during the last economic downturn, and now we're starting to see it happen again where people are losing their investments. We need to make sure that our Social Security program is solvent and solid, and that we've got tax revenue that can support this. The tax reform that the president pushed through 2 years ago has been detrimental to our households here in Massachusetts, and they're not paying money into taking care of our retirees or individuals that are on the Social Security program, and I will not stand up for that. I will stand up for it, rather. I absolutely will stand up for it. Sorry for the wrong wording on that. I will not stand for it.
Thank you for that. Seth?
My colleague, Representative John Larson from Connecticut, came up to the district a couple years ago to meet with me and seniors and talk about his bill to reform the Social Security system and to make sure that it's there not only for the seniors today, people like my parents who are counting on it, but also for my generation and my daughter's generation as well. And I don't think we talk about that enough. We need to preserve Social Security and Medicare for everybody who's expecting to get it in the next few years, but we also need to make it solvent for the next generation and the generation after that. We fight these battles on the Budget Committee, and I've worked my way up to be vice chairman of that committee, and it is a fight every single year against the Republicans who want to take away Social Security, who want to take away Medicare. I want to make sure that Medicare is available to more people across America than it is today. That's why I support a public option, where you have the ability to purchase, to have a government health care plan if you want it. You don't have to get health care from your employer, and I think that should be part of this discussion as well.
Well, thank you all. Great. Actually, yes, we'll go Angus and then Jamie. You raise your hand as well, right?
Sure. Yes.
My turn? Okay. First off, I agree. We need a robust, affordable public option for every American. That's a fundamental. It needs to be a fundamental part of what we do next on health care. But on Social Security, this is just a vitally important issue for all Americans. Social Security is the main source of income for most seniors in this country. It is the only source of income for 33% of Black Americans, for 40% of Latinx Americans, and it replaces only 41% of the income for an average wage earner in this country. So we need to strengthen Social Security. We cannot allow it to be weakened. It's a fundamental part of our contract with Americans that we provide Social Security and a decent retirement. And one other reform that I think is very important, and it was part of Elizabeth Warren's plan, right? She had a plan for that, is that she wanted to increase benefit retention for widows. Because right now, when somebody loses their spouse, their Social Security benefits drop precipitously. Her plan would have allowed for retention of 75% of the benefit for widows. I think that's a really important reform we need to make in Social Security.
Thank you. Jamie?
I just want to talk a little bit personally about the Social Security program and how that will affect me and how it has affected my own family. When my mother went to retire, she sat at the desk in Salem, and the gentleman turned the computer around and said to her, "You see all these years that you didn't work, this year, this year, this year, this year, this year? If you had worked, you would have been able to have more money in your Social Security check." And my mother's response was, "I'm really sorry I wasn't able to work during those years because I was busy raising 3 children. And I'm in the same position. I lost my job at 8 months pregnant, and I turned my entire career around. And I've not been able to recover that money back. And we need to make sure that we're looking at how we're taking care of women and families in this conversation. There's more money to be had by corporations that are evading taxes and finding loopholes, and that's where we need to be taking a look at to make sure that there is a way for individuals to retire comfortably and not worry about having to get a second job when they're 75 years old, and I'm committed to that.
I just want to take this opportunity to bring up something that I think is often overlooked in the job of a member of Congress. It's constituent services. It's showing up for the people in your district when they're not getting what they need or they deserve from the federal government. And we just passed an important milestone in my congressional office by returning over $3 million to constituents of this district. Now, that doesn't happen in just a few cases. That's over 5,000 individual cases that we have taken on, that we have won for constituents all across this district to get them things like the Social Security checks that they deserve when they don't come through. We've won awards for constituent services, literally the best office in the country for constituent services. I'm proud of those awards because they make a difference for families in this district. They make a difference in people's lives. And they make sure that when you're owed a Social Security check, you actually get it.
All right. So thank you, everyone. We're now going to take a short break before we move into our next portion of the debate, and we'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. So we are now moving on to the second portion where we're going to discuss education and housing. So the first question, we will go in the order of Jamie, Seth, and then Angus. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated many of the issues that have already existed in our communities, but particularly it has revealed countless challenges with how our country views and assesses education. Of these challenges, what is the most important aspect of the education system that we must fix, and how will the federal government contribute to that solution? Particularly, what are your thoughts on public education, supporting teachers, students, and families as we look towards 21st century education? Jamie?
Thank you for the question. It's all I've been doing is getting daily updates as a parent. What does school look like for my kids going back, talking to my friends that are teachers, my colleagues that are school committee members, making sure that I'm speaking with all of the different school committees and the towns and cities across the district. We have been given, because there was no national strategy, let's just put it out there, there was no national strategy. Then it was punted to the states, and then the states said, you guys are going to figure it out. We're going to let the individual communities figure it out. For instance, I was looking last night, Burlington, Billerica, North Andover, Tewksbury, and Wilmington all voted hybrid. Where I am, we're doing remote, because the buildings where our kids are going to school, the majority of them haven't been touched in 50 years. We don't have appropriate ventilation. We do not have the appropriate or adequate spacing. I'm not even going to say appropriate, it's adequate. We don't have adequate ventilation. We don't have adequate building space. We don't have adequate facilities, because when the federal government only puts about 6% of its discretionary budget towards education, this is what you get. I'm a trustee at Salem State, like I spoke about this earlier. We have parts of those buildings there that haven't been touched since the 1960s because they're not being looked at. They're not being given the money that they need. The public education system, both K through 12 and higher ed, has been backburnered for decades. There's been little to no investment except continued Prop 2.5 overrides in our communities and increased in property taxes. We are putting the weight and onus of how we're taking care of our, what should be a federal jewel, which should be one of our pinnings of what we stand for in the United States is public education. And that is one of my top 3 issues that I'm going to make sure that we address, because it's been kicked down the road long enough.
Thank you. Seth?
You know, the problem you just raised, Jamie, is so important, where we don't have federal standards, we don't have statewide standards even for reopening our schools. And I wrote an op-ed about this just a few days ago in the Salem News Gloucester Times that you should check out if you have a minute, where I talked about what a problem this specific issue is for people like my sister, who works in one school district and yet has kids in another because she lives in a different town from where she works. And if those standards aren't the same, it's going to be a real problem for the many teachers in Massachusetts in that position. We got $16.5 billion secured for public education in the CARES Act, and I've co-sponsored the HEALS Act to deliver $70 billion more. I still don't think that's enough, but it is a start. I led a letter to Education Secretary Betsy DeVos to stop her from diverting money intended for our public schools to private schools. And I'm proud of how many colleagues in Congress joined on that letter. At the bottom line, though, is at the end of the day, I want my 22-month-old daughter to have opportunities in this world, whether she wants to go to college, build the college, or defend the college. And we've got to build an education system that gives opportunities for every kid in America to do whatever they want.
Thank you. Angus?
So I'm a product of public education, K through 12 and public higher education, University of Massachusetts at Amherst, class of 91. And you know, I look at these reopening issues from two perspectives. I look at them from the perspective of a parent. As I mentioned, Diane and I have 4 kids. They're all school age 9 through 17. So we're directly impacted by these decisions, as are so many families throughout this district. I also look at it from the perspective of a teacher, because I've been a classroom teacher for 11 years at LaSalle University. And so at LaSalle, we're trying to figure out how we're going to make all this work too. But I look at it from both perspectives. And you know, I have to look at it as a parent and an educator from a safety first perspective. You know, we have a rising caseload in Massachusetts in recent weeks. We have Lynn and Salem now in the red zone on the map. Salem just yesterday pulled down their hybrid plan and decided to go all remote to start. I support what the teachers have called for. I support a phased-in approach where we start, as many communities have decided to do, remote, learning what we can from last spring's experience to make that as positive an educational experience as we can for kids, and phase in-class, in-person education as the data allows and the science permits.
All right, so I'm going to go to Jamie and then Seth.
You know, part of what I found disconcerting, and I'll ask the Congressman if he can speak to it, is that we saw $51 million of PPP monies go to Gordon College, Pingree, Bishop Fenwick, St. John's the Baptist, Austin Prep. They received money so that they were able to prepare to go back to school. And the money that the public schools have been waiting for has not come in. We're hearing that the state's, going to cover the PPE. It's $100,000 just for Topsfield Elementary School. It's over $600,000 for Salem State for their PPE. We've not seen the money. The money's not coming in. The testing's not being covered. I wanted to ask where or how is it that these sorts of schools, and schools like your alma mater, Harvard, were able to obtain these monies, but yet I'm working night and day with the school systems with Salem State, and we aren't seeing it.
Sure. So I'm happy to explain that, Jamie. So when you're talking about PPP money, you're talking about a pot of money that was designated to help keep Americans employed. And after we passed the first relief bill, the local YMCA leadership came to me and said, there's a big problem here because a lot of nonprofits are not eligible for this money. And so thanks to my relationships in the House, I was able to get a nonprofit bill that I authored included in the next round of relief legislation to ensure that nonprofits get this support as well. And so that, when you talk about some PPP dollars going to education, that's just because some of these educational institutions are nonprofits. But the education money is separate, and that's where I've led the efforts to literally preserve it for public schools, which is exactly what we intended with our legislation. I also want to just quickly respond to something that Angus brought up, because I've had a lot of conversations with school superintendents lately. And it's a nuance, but it's an important nuance. What they actually would like to do is not start remote, but start in person just so kids can meet their teachers, because that will facilitate remote learning. And then be prepared for the reality is that we will probably have to go remote. Now, that's not going to be possible in every community, but you can imagine how difficult it is if you don't have kids yourself to have a kid pay attention to a Zoom if they've never even met the teacher before. That's something that we should try to do as we figure out the nuance of how to reopen schools.
Jamie and then Angus.
Yeah, I appreciate your optimistic outlook, but the fact of the matter is we still don't know why the money hasn't come to the public schools. I was running point. I'm the mom running point on tech support at home. So I appreciate what you're saying. But the teachers have not been given what they need to go back to school. And that's the issue. And I hate to say this because I don't believe that you do these things with ill will, but your response to some folks in Bill Ricca in regards when they asked, where are we going to get the money for the PPE? How are we going to go back to school? You told them to get creative and you told them best of luck. And those are the sorts of things that people are upset about. And I myself am concerned as to where the money is for the public education. And I'm listening to the teachers. They do not want to go back to school because we're not just going, kids need interaction. Of course they do. I have 2 children, they need interaction, but we're playing Russian roulette and people's lives are at stake. And we're seeing, even in Lynn, we haven't even talked, 25, they're at 25 per 100,000 right now. And this has happened within 2 weeks. This is a concern.
I just want to respond because, yeah. So look, I was texting with Mayor Driscoll of Salem last night about this, and I told her I fully support her decision to go remote because of the caseload in Salem. I was just responding to a nuance of something that Angus raised about whether it's in an ideal world and you have to go remote at some point, whether it's better to do that early or late. And the consensus of the education professionals I've spoken to is it's better to try to start in person so you can meet your teachers, even if it's just very briefly, and then go remote. But the reality is we are almost certainly going to have to go remote. That's what I wrote about in my op-ed. And so we've got to be prepared for that eventuality. Now, the way that this works in government is that Congress appropriates the money. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, the administration is responsible for administering it. And that's the way our system of government was set up. So look, we can have a good debate about whether our founding fathers got it right, but that's the way it works. And so Congress has appropriated this money, but it's not always administered correctly by the administration, which is why it's so important that we fight for a new administration, which is something I do every day. Thanks.
Angus?
Well, I'll use my time to speak to the broader issue of education. It's the backbone of our innovation economy in Massachusetts. We have the highest percentage of people with a college degree of any state in America. Our K-12 system is what has prepared our workforce. We need to keep it strong, and that's going to mean advocacy for resources in a variety of ways. I want to see us get to universal access to early education. It is, to me, unacceptable that families are spending as much as it costs to send your kid to college to send your kid to daycare. Longer than you should need to, because there should be a public education pre-K option for every family. We need to do that. We need to make sure that we're providing funding so we can provide an equitable education to every kid in this country and in this district, regardless of zip code, including our voc tech schools, which play a critical role in workforce preparedness. And then, of course, there's the issue of access to public higher education. It costs $42,000 a year now to send your kid to UMass Amherst. That's totally unacceptable. That is not affordable. Our public higher education system was set up to be the affordable option for working families. We have lost that in Massachusetts. We need to make a transformational investment in the affordability of public higher education.
Jamie and then Seth.
I appreciate the UMass Amherst. My husband went to UMass Amherst. I'm talking to people who can't even afford to go to North Shore Community College in Middlesex. That's what we need to be talking. We have to be focused on the local stuff. I appreciate the appropriations. I understand the appropriations process. I've been a part of the appropriations process. My question to you, and pardon me, we need paid family leave, we need child care infrastructure, we need paid sick leave, public health needs to be part of the conversation. There's a whole social services component of this when we're talking about schools, access to food. Parents are trying to go to work. We've used this as a pseudo child care situation. We are failing at every point. And I am listening to the teachers, and they aren't feeling safe to go back. So I appreciate the appropriation, but I'm asking you, even if it was allocated and Baker got X amount of money, why aren't you advocating? I don't hear you. I hear you talking about it, but I don't hear you advocating. And I'm also concerned that the nonprofit bill that you helped work on actually put money into the schools, charter, private, and and religious schools, and we are still hanging. And we don't even know what this next fall and winter are going to look for us for schools. I don't think it's going to look good. And so I want to know, where are you advocating on this?
So I know both of them addressed you, Seth. You can have 2 minutes to respond to both.
Okay. Thanks. I advocate for this funding every single day. That's why I was the leader in Congress of this letter, to make sure that the Education Secretary delivered on the promise that we voted on in Congress, which was to make sure that money intended for the public schools actually goes to public schools. I led that letter. A lot of colleagues signed on. But that's what leadership means when it comes to advocacy. Now, look, we got to change this administration, all right? I think Betsy DeVos is terrible. I think she should be gone. And that's why I'm doing everything I can to help Joe Biden get elected to be the next president. We got to make sure that that happens as well. But in the meantime, we have a lot of work to do to keep fighting for this funding in Congress. And I guarantee you, if I have the privilege of representing everyone in this district again, I will keep up that fight. I will keep up that fight because I know that the next generation, people like my daughter, are depending on us to win that fight. I know that teachers right now, teachers right here in Massachusetts and teachers across this country are counting on us to deliver on funding so that they can do their jobs of educating our next generation without having to put their lives on the line. That should be a basic expectation of what we deliver from our government. It's not happening with this administration. It's why we need a new administration. But I absolutely fight for it in Congress every single day, and I'm going to keep up that fight.
Yes, Angus.
You know, I think leadership is about priorities. And I've been clear about what my priorities are. Right? I have 6 top priorities for the 6th Congressional District. I encourage you to go to my website, angusforcongress.com. You can learn about those 6 priorities. Education, economy, housing, healthcare, they're all priorities for me. But when we hear about leadership from the incumbent, I think it's important for people to recognize. I think people around the district already know this, right? I'm telling you something you already know. What his real priorities have been. Right? Number 1 priority was try to get rid of Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House, by which he gave up his seat at the table in Washington, which means we don't have a seat at the table in Washington or an advocate who can be effective in advocating for us. To run for president, right, which revealed that he's a little more interested in the job he wants next than the job he has now. And then to become the only Democrat in the entire House of Representatives to sponsor this resolution to blame China for the coronavirus. These were the wrong priorities. I think we need a leader representing us who is a lifelong progressive Democrat. I'm the only person in this race who is a lifelong progressive Democrat and who has the right priorities for this district.
I'm going to let Seth respond, and I just want to remind everyone we're sticking to education before moving on to housing.
Yeah, look, I mean, education is such an important priority. I think we should be discussing that more, but look, there's more political mudslinging, so I'll respond to these attacks. I haven't lost my seat at the table. That's why I've been able to deliver on things like the nonprofit bill, on $1.2 billion to this district in just the last year. That's because I have a strong seat at the table. Look at what just happened this past week. Just this past week, Vice President Joe Biden picked as his running mate Senator Harris, who leveled the strongest attacks at him, far stronger than anything I leveled at Speaker Pelosi during the campaign. Because professionals know how to have an important democratic debate, an important political fight, to talk about, to debate what the future of our country is, and then move on and work together. That's exactly what Speaker Pelosi and I have done. We're partnering on these bills. We're making change for the American people. We're focused on the future. It's only my opponents who want to drag us back to the past. Let me respond quickly to the other charges as well. I love this job. I love this district. I ran for president because I love this country, and when you see this country under assault, I'm going to do everything I can to fight for it. I thought it was important to have the perspective of combat veteran, the only combat veteran in this race, someone who understands what it means to fight in the longest war in American history, the war that's still going on today. I'm glad I offered that perspective in this race, but I'm also glad that my friend and mentor, Joe Biden, became the nominee. And I look forward to working with him in the next administration. And by the way, that relationship, too, is a very important one to make sure that this representative can deliver for the district. And finally, on China, look, you don't have time in Congress to save your battles for when it's convenient. I've been fighting for COVID relief, but I also recognize that China is stealing our vaccine data. They're stealing profits from our fishermen, and for all the high-tech companies in this district, they're stealing your ideas and your jobs every single night. People here know that, and I'm going to keep up that fight. That's why I got on that bill. Now, when the president started using it for his racist agenda, I got off.
I'm sorry.
I get that, okay? But I just want to respond to those attacks. I hope we can get back to talking about education, because we should be talking about how we can take this district forward. But if there's political mudslinging, I'll have to respond. Thanks.
So, Angus, you brought up earlier the affordability of universities and colleges in our state. And so, I mean, I know you want to respond to that, but if you all could also speak to how you would be a champion for these institutions of all sizes, while also supporting and promoting the need to remain affordable to students both here and coming from elsewhere. But so, Angus, Jamie, and then Seth.
So just to follow up on that, I haven't thrown an ounce of mud. I'm talking about your record, and that's fair game in an election cycle, and that's all I'm talking about. And I think Nancy Pelosi's doing an exceptional job as Speaker. I think she's been the leader we needed in these times. If Seth had his way, she wouldn't be there doing that job. She was the first woman ever to hold that job in our nation's history, and I think that his effort to try to oust her was a mistake. I think that we needed leadership on things like pipeline of PPE and ventilators, on social distancing and early mitigation of this crisis. And instead, what we got was a meaningless resolution to blame China for the coronavirus. That's what he chose as his priority. Leadership is about priorities. When it comes to public higher education access, that's one of my priorities, right? Because we need to make sure that working families have access to affordable public higher education. And as I mentioned earlier, we've lost that, not just for the UMass system, but our state colleges, universities, for our community colleges. We need to make a transformational investment in the affordability of public higher education. I think we can do that in the form of a block grant program to the states from the federal government to provide the support we needed, that we need to reduce costs of public higher education. I also think we need to address the issue of the crushing burden of student loan debt that too many of our young people are coming out of college with. I would like to see us both provide some level of forgiveness for student loan debt. Also, I would like to see us allow students and recent college graduates to refinance student loan debt. There is no reason why, when you take out a mortgage and rates get better, you can refinance that mortgage. When you take out a student loan from a private lender, you're stuck with that interest rate for the duration of that loan. That's a policy that is friendly to lenders, not to borrowers. And it's creating a burden that prevents people who are recent college graduates from being able to build their own life, take the job they want to take, start a company, buy a house. I think we need to address this issue because it's a fundamental issue that ties into the question of affordability for higher education.
Thank you. Jamie?
Yeah, and I do want to touch upon the fact, Seth, you've done a great job raising money for the Democratic Party. You have 7 political action committees. I'm looking at an article from 2007 in Politico, you considering running for president. That was 3 years ago. Then you did run for president. Now you're talking about Biden as a constituent, a potential constituent. I'm concerned that you're actually going to leave the district again. And I do want to put that out there. This is part of why I am running, because you showed intent that you didn't want this job, and I've expressed that to you, and I'm just I am reframing that again. In regards to what our public higher ed system looks like, of which I graduated as a part of, I worked 3 jobs and put myself through school and then continue to pay loans after this. And I'm not talking about UMass, Amherst, although Lowell is part of this district, although it's in the 3rd conversation. We need to be restructuring and reauthorizing the Higher Education Act, which hasn't been touched in 10 years. We need to take money and shift it out of our military, of which we spend over 50% of our discretionary budget, and put it towards higher ed. We need to reinvest at the federal and state level into our public higher ed system. We need to show that we actually care. And we need to start giving people access to grant money and forgiveness, and put together grants and loan forgiveness for public service, teachers, individuals in the front line, medical. That's what we need to be focusing on.
Seth? Thank you.
So I want to talk about some of the things that we actually really need to do to reform our education. There are families all across this district who are crushed by student loan debt. I support a plan to forgive student loan debt up to a certain amount. Now, I don't support free college for all. Why? Because that gives another handout to the rich who actually can pay tuition. They already get enough handouts through our tax code. I think we got to make sure everybody pays their fair share, but no one should have to graduate college with an insurmountable burden of student debt. I also support a national service education guarantee. And as part of my campaign for president, I put forward the most ambitious national service program that we've seen, a program that would allow people to serve their country for 1, 2, or 3 years and then get help paying for college. Finally, I support a skills guarantee. Now, the way this program works is that you go to school when you want to earn a new skill, learn a new skill in your job. You don't have to be young, you don't have to be college age, you can be twice college age, but you can go to school to learn a skill, and the way this public-private partnership works is they will cover the cost by the increased salary that you make. So that's an innovative proposal that will help people go back to school when they want to improve their income.
Thank you. Jamie?
I want to bring up again the fact that we have an opportunity for employers in this district to partner with students that are going into Middlesex, Salem State, Lowell, North Shore, Northern Essex, and say, here's the jobs that we need filled. We will bring you on board, a public-private partnership here, and allow them to help subsidize these individuals' education and actually create a pipeline for the jobs that are not being filled in this district. That is something that needs to be a priority. I'll go back, I mentioned it earlier, Middlesex Community College, it was identified as a strategic grant partner and received $841,000 grant to help the college scale up its successful biotechnology program. These are the sorts of investments we need to be making, and these are the sorts of programs I plan on fighting for, because education is not a secondary issue or an afterthought. It should be the main focus of the future of our economy and the future of our country and our district.
Thank you. Angus?
You know, it's wonderful that we have so many fine private universities in Massachusetts, and they play a central and critical role because they don't just have an educational mission, they have a research mission as well. They play a critical role in the innovation process in churning out new technologies, new companies. That's what leads to new jobs in our innovation economy in Massachusetts. But here's the difference. What we know about our public higher education system is that those are the students who stick around afterwards because they're from here, and then they stay here, they build their life here, they build their family here, and they contribute to our economy. That's where I see the fundamental need for support, is to ensure affordability of our public higher education system so that working families can realistically send their kid to school. I ask this question every time I talk with voters. How many of you went to a public higher education institution? And it's always somebody who raises their hand. And very often there's somebody either my age or older. I'll ask them, how much did you pay? And the answer is $500 a semester, $1,000 a semester. We have lost the idea that public higher education should be an affordable option. And by the way, our public higher education system plays a critical role in research too. UMass is one of the largest recipients of NIH funding and National Cancer Institute funding in our state, and their research mission is important too to our economy. They're churning out innovation and creating new companies and new jobs as well.
Thank you all. We're going to move on to housing. I'm going to, since we're somewhat running out of time, I'm going to ask 2 questions. If we can kind of keep the answers to about 2 minutes each, if that's okay. Okay. For housing, our Route 393 communities are desirable to move to, but they're also, as I'm sure you all know, unaffordable to many groups of people, including diverse populations as well as first-time buyers. And to make matters worse, President Trump has revoked the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Program, which is a mechanism to assist residents to pay for and afford a home in our district. So what role do you see the government has in keeping housing affordable in our district, as well as increasing diversity of those constituents that can afford their homes here? I will start with Seth, Angus, and then Jamie.
Housing is such a critical issue right now across the country, and we see it right here at home in Massachusetts, where we do have one of the best economies in the country, and yet people cannot afford to live. Here out in the B's, as they say it, I hear from so many families who say, I can't even afford the home that I grew up in. And that's got to change. There's 3 things that we need to do. 1, we need to continue the federal government's historic support through federal housing grants. And this is something that I have fought for tooth and nail. I've voted for my voting record on this is 100% in supporting federal housing assistance, because it makes a difference for lives. I see this right here at home in our community. The second thing we need to do is we need to end historic, often actually racist housing restrictions. These zoning laws that people across the aisle are trying to work to change, but that President Trump is trying to rescind. He's trying to rescind changes made under the Obama administration so that we can allow new development. And third, I have to bring this back to transportation, because so much of access to housing is about having quality transportation so that you can get to an affordable community. And yes, so that you can live in diverse communities, so that you actually have a choice when you have a job in downtown Boston to live all over Massachusetts. That's not a choice people have today, because so much of housing is restricted because you don't have the access to get there. You don't have a reasonable commute. That's why it's holding back our economy. It's why people don't have the housing options that we need. And it's why I support such a progressive, transformative vision for building transportation access all across the Commonwealth.
Thank you. Angus?
You know, I've met a lot of interesting people during this campaign. I met a man named Shafee from North Andover. He's an immigrant, has a good job, but he pays more than 50% of his income in rent. It just costs too much. And it's a huge contributor to the lack of diversity in many of the communities in this district. People can't afford to buy a home. People can't even afford to rent an apartment. So we need to do a number of things. We need to increase the pipeline of federal funding so we can fund more projects for expanded housing. But most of the federal programs are focused on rental units. Those are important, and we need more rental units. But we also need to provide a pathway to homeownership by using innovative models that are being used elsewhere in the country to allow people to build limited equity as toward home ownership so that they can eventually have a realistic shot at having enough for a down payment and enough to get a mortgage and buy a home. That's what people have as their goal. That's what people want. That's the path toward economic mobility, is to give people a path toward home ownership. And we need to strengthen the Community Reinvestment Act to make sure that lenders are doing their part and are actually filing their Community Reinvestment Act plans and aggressively seeking to provide loan financing to people in their communities so that people have access to credit so they can achieve that goal of home ownership.
Thank you. Jamie?
Yes, thank you very much. You know, I don't think I need to remind anyone that we're in the middle of a pandemic, okay? And I'm putting that out there because we saw in 2008 the decline in the housing market because of bad loans. I myself got caught up in that, and we almost lost our house. And then when we tried to fix that because of different backroom dealings that I had no idea was going on, we actually found out after 4 months of trying to keep our house that we didn't qualify for any relief. And right now, we need to be giving people rent relief, mortgage relief, the ability to defer their mortgage if they have a home. If they are living in an apartment, they should be able to stay in their apartment during this pandemic. We, as a country, should be facilitating at least 24 months of relief for families across the United States so that people have a roof over their head. Now, when it comes time to buying a home in Burlington or in this particular area, the average home price is $525,000. We need clear path for credit repair. We need to get rid of credit score penalties that prohibit people from obtaining mortgages, and we need to expand FHA loans and help first-time buyers.
Absolutely. Angus, and then Seth.
So on the housing issue, Seth, I have to take issue with your voting record and your description of your voting record as progressive. In June of 2018, you were one of 12 Democrats in the entire House, and the only Democrat from Massachusetts. You broke with the rest of our delegation again to support the Thrive Act, legislation that would have diverted 10,000 Section 8 vouchers from poor people who have, in many cases, been on waiting lists for years to find an apartment for them and their families, and diverted those resources to a different program to provide housing options for people recovering from addiction. Now, it's very important to provide those housing options for people recovering from addiction. But as Maxine Waters said on the floor of the House, she said, taking 10,000 vouchers from those who have been waiting in line for years, I'm talking about single-family parents with their children who simply are praying and hoping they can get a voucher so they can get a decent place to live. That's what that bill did. So I want to understand how you describe that as a progressive record on housing, to take 10,000 vouchers away from poor people and diverting them. Now, I applaud the goal of creating housing options for people suffering or recovering from addiction, but we didn't need to take those resources from poor people in order to create that new program. We should have just created that new program. So I want to understand why you voted with only 11 other Democrats and broke from the rest of the Massachusetts delegation to vote for the Thrive Act.
So I'm very happy to explain that because it was a very progressive vote. Because a lot of people don't want to give options to recovering addicts. I'm someone who does. I was one of the first elected officials in Massachusetts to support legalization of cannabis. I support legalizing injection sites because they work. The science is behind it. There are a lot of other of my colleagues, some of the colleagues that you just praised, who are opposed to this progressive change. This is something I think we need in Massachusetts. But I do take issue very much so, Angus, with your characterization as the only progressive in this race. Because frankly, your record on criminal justice reform, some of the things that we're talking about here, giving people who've had a criminal past a second chance, is regressive. In fact, it's borderline racist. Because you wrote a report that called for charging people money to clear their name of warrants. He called for stripping people of government assistance and professional licenses, charging people money to clear their warrants. And this specific program that you authored was cited in the Department of Justice report on Ferguson as one of the primary drivers of the racist policies in that city. We have people in Massachusetts who have outstanding warrants for failing to pay for a dog license. That is not progressive. I am against that. We need real reform, and we need to give opportunity to people, which is why I voted for that act. Now look, I said when I took that vote that I would rather it be a separate program. I'm with you on that. Of course it would be better to be a separate program. Sometimes you don't have that option.
Okay,
You have to choose the best
I'd like
choice,
to
and that's
be
what I
able
did with that vote.
To say something, please.
So since he brought up Angus has the rebuttal, and then Jamie.
Thank you.
Well, Seth, I mean, every other member of the Democratic caucus didn't see it that way, except for 12. And every other member of the Massachusetts delegation didn't see it that way. And those are progressives, right? You described yourself when you ran for president as a moderate. So when I say I'm the only lifelong progressive Democrat in the race, that's what I'm talking about. So I think it was the wrong vote. And you tried to raise these allegations in the last debate, and you didn't make any sense then. You're not making any sense now. You came out in opposition to the state's DNA database, which is a critical tool for solving cases of rape and sexual assault and murder in our state. You did. That's what you said in the last debate. I worked hard to create that tool. We were the last state in America to create a DNA database linked to the federal database. We did so at risk of losing millions of dollars in federal funding if we didn't pass that law, and it's been used to solve hundreds of cold cases, including rape and sexual assault. So I think women in their state deserve that law enforcement tool. And with the arrest warrant issue, we had a backlog of tens of thousands of arrest warrants that were being treated as meaningless, and it needed reform of that system. So that backlog didn't just continue to grow forever. And if people have arrest warrants, they should go clear them up. Just like if people have parking tickets, they should go clear them up before they get their next driver's license renewal.
So Jamie's going to go, then Seth's going to go, then we're going to wrap up and do our closing statements.
I'm very concerned about the fact that our district is trying to live in the middle of a pandemic. And as much as I appreciate the political theater that's going on here, it's not addressing the needs of what families and seniors in this entire district are facing right now. I have been working day and night over the past year to say, hey, I love this place, I'm from here, I want to represent it, I want you to get to know me. And then all of our lives changed in March. Actually, I think it was March 12th. It's August 13th. Nothing has changed. We still don't have the supplies that we need to send our teachers back to school. Our hospitals don't have what they need for them to take care of people who they need to be prepared for in this next surge. People are worried about losing their homes, they're losing their jobs, they don't have health insurance. I'm here to tell you, I want the job to take care of you, and I'm here for that reason. Thank you.
Thank you. Seth?
Look, I agree with my opponent that the warrant system needs reform. The problem is that the reform he pushed was regressive reform, because it said that if you can pay, if you're rich enough to pay to get rid of a warrant, then you can do so. That's not a progressive system, that's a regressive system. And not only that, on top of all that, that money, you know where it goes? That money goes to funding police departments. This is the polar opposite of the kind of progressive change that millions of Americans are fighting for in the streets tonight. I never said I was opposed to the DNA database. Of course not. It's solving crimes. In fact, we already had a DNA database for violent criminals and sexual offenders. But the problem was with the way my opponent wrote that legislation. In 2012, the Globe came out with a report that said that as a result of writing bad policy, 10,000 samples went uncollected. Bad policy has real consequences. That's part of your record, and that's why we're talking about it.
So we're going to go to closing statements. So if you would like to address that, we're going to start with you anyway, Angus. So perhaps you all have 3 minutes to for your closing statements. So perhaps starting with you.
Great. I want to thank our hosts. I want to thank our opponents. What I think was a really productive dialogue tonight that highlights the differences, the choice that people have in this election, and it's a clear choice. If you are a voter who thinks the status quo is great and everything's going fine, I don't meet many voters like that, but if you're one of those voters, you have a choice. You can vote for the incumbent, you'll get more of the same. If Seth Moulton had the will or the skills to create change, he would have done that by now. I think we need a member of Congress with a record of getting things done, a model for change that works and the right priorities. I think we need a member of Congress who shows up. And I've been showing up throughout this district, cleaning up trash in Salem, participating in the Tewksbury Democratic Town Committee's food drive, handing out masks at the commuter rail stations in Billerica and Reading and other communities. I spent a day before COVID hit, before we couldn't knock on doors anymore in this campaign cycle, knocking on doors in Bedford. And I asked every voter I met one question. I asked them, do you know who your member of Congress is? Do you know I only found one voter that entire day who even knew that Seth Moulton was their member of Congress? That's not okay. A member of Congress, part of your job is to be available, accessible, to be actively involved in your communities. People should never have to wonder who their member of Congress is. Now, I've been traveling around this district campaigning for more than a year. I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen Seth Moulton. And that's why the nickname has stuck. That's why people call you No-Show Seth. I'm the only lifelong progressive Democrat in this race, and my priorities are clear. 6 priorities for the 6th District. I hope you'll go to the website and learn more about them at angusforcongress.com. And I have a 30-year record of building coalitions of progressives and creating change. This is the most important election of our lifetimes, and the time for a change is now. People already have ballots in their hands, right? Mail-in voting is underway. This may be our last chance to communicate with voters before they make their decision in this race. So I urge people to do what I've asked you to do throughout this debate. Go to the website, angusforcongress.com. Learn about the choice that's in front of you. Learn about the priorities that I'm talking about in this race, and get involved. Democracy is a participatory sport. All right? I want everyone watching tonight who is interested in getting involved with my campaign for change to reach out via our website. We'd like to put a sign in your front yard and a bumper sticker on your car. We need people to volunteer. We need people to contribute. So when you're on that website, please sign up to do all those things. And what you'll get if you elect me to Congress is a tireless advocate who will never give up, let up, or slow down until we get the change that we need. And I'll put my experience to work as an organizer and as an economic development leader in our state for you and for this district. I won't take no for an answer. Thank you, and I ask for your vote.
Thank you. Jamie?
Great. Thank you, Representative Nguyen. These are one of my secret index cards I've been holding. It says, I am here to represent the people and the families of the 6th District. That's it for me. That's it right there for me. I'm not an establishment candidate. I've been very transparent about who I am and what I stand for. I'm running to fight for the people of this district, and I will not be distracted from that goal. I'm one of you. I grew up here. My family and friends are here, and I'm raising my own family here. This place is the most important place to me, as it is to you. I will put my proven expertise in the work I've done in the halls of Congress and in the Massachusetts State House to work for the people of this district. I am running to represent the everyday citizen like you and I. Right now, no one's fighting for our public schools. Money's going to private schools instead of our public schools and our public universities. Our teachers and support staff are being left behind. This is indefensible. I'm able to run for Congress because I've had access to a public education. I'm part of that success story of what a public educator can do and what our students can achieve when given full support. And let me just say, under normal times, we aren't there right now. I commit to making sure that public schools become a priority again. I've worked relentlessly on passing bipartisan legislation and funding from the federal government. Me, as a private citizen, I've done this. I have the record to prove it. And not only have I helped pass legislation, as I just said, I brought home the funding, and it came to this district. If I can do that as a private citizen, I'm looking forward to doing it as your Congresswoman. I've addressed substance use disorder, mental health access, funding for our community health centers, and maternal justice for our Black and brown birthing brothers and sisters. I've helped change immigration laws to benefit the biotech, healthcare, and university systems right here in this district. I know how Congress works because I've been working the halls of Congress for about 2 decades now. I have a proven track record of succeeding in the name of we the people, because that's who I care about, who are ultimately the ones elected officials are tasked to serve. I have the ability to focus on issues, find common ground, and deliver the goods. When in Congress, the communities will have a seat at my table. They're going to have my ear. They're going to be part of my priorities. This pandemic's given us pause to address issues that we've not addressed for decades. It's time to do the hard work. I'm a workhorse. I am not a show pony. I'm not looking for any other job but to represent you in Washington. I will be the best representative you've ever had. I've had the best time on this campaign trail. I've loved tonight, Representative Trom. Congressman Angus, thank you. It's the people who matter. Representation matters. I ask the public for their support, and I thank you for this evening and this opportunity. Thank you to the committees.
Thank you, Jamie. And Seth?
I want to thank you all for tuning in tonight. This is an important discussion. It's an important discussion that we should have as part of the democratic process, and I want to thank my opponents for joining in it. But you know what, Angus, you're right. You haven't seen me out campaigning. You haven't seen me at political committee meetings. That's because I've been busy standing in the parking lot of our local hospitals and meeting with healthcare workers, nurses and doctors, the heroes on the front lines of this fight, and helping them get more access to PPE. I've been meeting with the UPS workers like I did this morning, the guys driving trucks who are not getting supported by their company even as they're asked to do an inordinately bigger amount of work because of this pandemic. I've been working in Washington to actually get relief passed, like making sure that my nonprofit bill was included in the CARES Act, like making sure that we hold the education secretary accountable and deliver funds to our public schools where they deserve to go. I've gotten mental health care legislation passed. We didn't get to talk about that tonight, but it's something we should talk about because it makes a huge difference for people in this district. I've been working with the fishermen to bring them disaster relief, which has finally arrived, and to protect them from the virus. That's the difference that's on the ballot this September. This job might be about politics to some people, but to me, it's about service. I've been thinking a lot about my first campaign, the promises that I made to fight for change in that race. Of all the conversations I had, I think the single most memorable was with a United States Navy veteran at the Agawam Diner in Rowley. And when I told him what I was doing, that I was running for Congress, taking on an 18-year incumbent, he gave me a piece of advice. He said, "Seth, if you win this race, promise me that you'll go to Washington as an American. Not as a Democrat or as a Republican, but as an American. Someone who's going to take an independent view to every issue." That's why I'm proud of my record. I'm proud of the times that I've disagreed with some of my Democratic colleagues and some of my colleagues in this delegation, because I do what's right for this district, for the people that I represent, and what's right for the future of our country. On election night 5 years ago, I made that promise not to fight political fights in Washington, but to fight for Americans, for what's right, even when it's not politically popular. I'm going to keep that promise. If I have the privilege of representing you for another 2 years in Congress, I'm going to keep that promise because I have seen what happens when people in Washington don't fight for you. I've seen those consequences in very personal and in human terms. I've seen what happens when people vote out of political convenience to have a hit on election night, when they aren't afraid to go against their party to do what's right for the country. One thing you can count on is that I'll always do what's right for America, and I'll do what's right for you and your families. Thank you very much.
Thank you to all. And ladies and gentlemen, that is our conversation for the night. We would like to really thank the candidates for taking the time to be here, to be such an important part of this very important conversation. And we'd also like to thank the North Andover CAM and their staff for hosting this debate, as well as my great timekeeper, Sarah Jane Griffin, and the producer for the night, Christopher Campbell of Burlington. Also, thank you to the chairs of the 393 Democratic Town Committee Coalition that came together to organize this debate, including Sean Hannigan of the Bedford Democratic Town Committee, Christopher Campbell of Burlington, John Gagliardi of Billerica, Michael Liss of North Andover, Sarah Jane Griffin of North Reading, Kathy Zeke of Reading, and Kathy Dwyer of Tewksbury. Lastly, please remember to vote on or before September 1st in our Democratic primary. Please make your voices heard and go out there and vote. For more information about voting by mail or requesting a mail-in ballot, contact your town or city clerk or the Secretary of State's website. Thank you all and have a good night.